Another soldier noticed her hands. Beneath the flour and the burns, there were scars. Not kitchen scars. These were older, deeper, the kind that came from wire and metal and things that cut in the dark. And then there was the incident with the knife. One afternoon, a young cook named Private Williams was showing off for his friends. He grabbed a chef's knife and started spinning it between his fingers, laughing as it flashed in the light. "Check this out," he said. "Saw this in a movie once." The knife slipped. It flew from his hand, spinning toward Rachel, who had her back turned at the stove. What happened next lasted less than 2 seconds. Rachel spun, caught the knife by the handle without looking, and set it gently on the counter. Then she turned back to the stove as if nothing had happened. The kitchen went silent. William stood frozen, mouth open. His friends stared. Even the head chef, a grizzled veteran of 30 years in army kitchens, looked stunned. "How did you do that?" William stammered. Rachel shrugged. "Reflexes," she said simply, and returned to stirring her pot. But that night, Williams told his roommate about it. His roommate told his squad leader. The squad leader mentioned it to a sergeant. And slowly, the whispers began to spread. Who was Rachel Bennett, really? The answer came on a cold morning in February, when everything changed. A convoy of black SUVs rolled through the main gate of Fort Braxton shortly after dawn. Military police cleared the roads. Soldiers straightened their uniforms and stood at attention as the vehicles passed. Word spread quickly. General Nathan Price was visiting. 4 stars. Commander of Army Special Operations. A living legend who had led some of the most classified missions in modern military history. The base transformed. Every surface was cleaned. Every uniform pressed. Every protocol followed to the letter. General Price was not the kind of man you disappointed. By mid-morning, the general had completed his inspection of the training facilities and was scheduled to tour the support operations. His aide suggested skipping the mess hall. "Standard facility, sir. Nothing noteworthy." General Price shook his head. "I always visit the mess hall," he said. "You learn more about a base from its kitchen than its command center." So at 11:30, General Nathan Price walked through the doors of the Fort Braxton mess hall, flanked by colonels and aides and a security detail that made the regular soldiers nervous just looking at them. The hall fell silent. Soldiers scrambled to their feet, nearly knocking over their trays in their haste to show respect. Staff Sergeant Moore stood at rigid attention, his earlier arrogance replaced by visible anxiety. General Price moved through the hall slowly, nodding to soldiers, exchanging brief words with officers. His eyes swept over everything, missing nothing. And then he stopped. He had been walking toward the serving line when something caught his attention. A woman behind the counter, stirring a pot of soup, gray hair beneath a hairnet, worn apron, quiet hands. The general's expression changed. Those who were watching later described it as recognition, not the casual kind you show when you spot an acquaintance. This was deeper. This was the look of a man seeing a ghost. General Price walked past the serving counter, past the surprised officers, past confused soldiers, and stopped directly in front of Rachel Bennett. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Rachel had gone very still. Her ladle hung suspended over the pot. Her eyes, usually so carefully blank, now held something else, something guarded. "Bennett," the general said softly. It wasn't a question. Rachel set down the ladle. She straightened slowly, her posture shifting in a way that made her look like a completely different person. "General Price," she replied. Her voice was steady, but there was a weight beneath it. The mess hall had gone absolutely silent. 2,000 soldiers held their breath, watching a 4-star general stand before a cook like she was the most important person in the room. And then General Price did something that no one expected. He removed his cap, tucked it under his arm, and raised his hand in a crisp, formal salute. Gasps rippled through the hall. Whispers erupted, then died as people strained to hear what was happening. Staff Sergeant Moore, standing just 10 feet away, felt his stomach drop. He had mocked this woman, called her pathetic, questioned her worth. And now the most powerful general in special operations was saluting her like she was a head of state. "Ma'am," General Price said, his voice carrying across the silent room. "It's an honor to see you again." Rachel held his gaze for a long moment. Then, slowly, she raised her own hand and returned the salute. "The honor is mine, sir," she said quietly. The general lowered his hand but didn't step back. Instead, he turned to face the stunned crowd of soldiers. "I imagine you're all wondering what's happening," he said. "Let me tell you." He gestured toward Rachel, who stood motionless beside her soup pot. "This woman served under my command 23 years ago. She wasn't a cook then. She was a ground branch officer for the CIA's Special Activities Division. She operated in places that don't exist on any map, doing things that will never be declassified. When my team was trapped behind enemy lines in a country I'm still not allowed to name, she was the one who came for us. Alone, on foot, through 40 miles of hostile territory." The general's voice grew quieter, but somehow more intense. "She carried my wounded radio operator on her back for the last 12 miles. She killed 11 enemy combatants with a knife when her ammunition ran out. She got us to the extraction point with 3 bullets in her own body and refused medical evacuation until every member of my team was on a helicopter first." Silence pressed down on the mess hall like a physical weight. Rachel Bennett received the Intelligence Star, the Distinguished Intelligence Cross, and a silver star that most of you will never read about. She is, without question, one of the most decorated covert operatives in American history. And until today, I had no idea she was working in this mess hall. He turned back to Rachel. His eyes were bright. "Why?" he asked simply. Rachel was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft but clear. "Because I got tired, sir. Tired of the missions. Tired of the killing. Tired of being someone who didn't exist." She paused. "I wanted to be ordinary. I wanted to cook meals and go home at night and not wonder if I'd live to see morning. I wanted peace." She looked out at the soldiers, staring at her. At Moore, whose face had gone pale. At Williams, who still remembered the knife she had caught without looking. "I didn't come here for recognition," she continued. "I came here to disappear. To serve in a different way. A quieter way." General Price nodded slowly. "You've earned whatever peace you want, Bennett. More than earned it." He paused. "But these soldiers deserve to know who's been feeding them. They deserve to know that a hero has been standing among them all along." He turned to the crowd one final time. "When you look at someone and think you know their story, remember this moment. Remember that the quiet woman serving your breakfast might have saved more lives than you'll ever know. Remember that courage doesn't always wear a uniform or carry a rank." Then he straightened and raised his voice to a command. "Attention!" Every soldier in the mess hall snapped to attention. Boots crashed against the floor. Arms flew to foreheads. 2,000 salutes rose as one, all directed at the gray-haired woman in the stained apron. Rachel Bennett stood very still. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. She had trained herself long ago not to cry. Slowly, with the dignity of someone who had faced death more times than she could count, she returned their salute. The moment held. 1 heartbeat. 2. 3. Then General Price lowered his hand, and the spell broke. But nothing was the same. Staff Sergeant Moore approached Rachel later that afternoon. His earlier swagger was gone. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of his own words coming back to haunt him. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice cracked, "I don't know how to apologize. The things I said, I had no idea." Rachel looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once. "You couldn't have known," she said. "That was the point." "But I should have known better than to judge," Moore insisted. "I should have known that anyone working on this base deserves respect, whether they carry a rifle or a ladle." Rachel considered this. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. It was small and brief, but it transformed her face. "Then learn from it, Sergeant," she said. "That's all any of us can do." She returned to her station, picked up her ladle, and went back to work. The news spread across Fort Braxton like wildfire. By evening, everyone knew. The cook in the mess hall was a CIA legend. The quiet woman who never spoke had saved General Price's entire team. The invisible person they had mocked was a warrior whose missions were too classified to discuss. For days, soldiers approached the serving line differently. They stood straighter, spoke more respectfully. Some tried to thank her. Rachel accepted their words with quiet grace, but she never sought attention. She never told stories about her past. She simply kept cooking, kept serving, kept being exactly who she had chosen to become. 1 month later, a small ceremony was held in the base commander's office. Only a handful of people attended. General Price had returned specifically for the occasion. Rachel Bennett, the base commander read from a citation, "In recognition of your extraordinary service to this nation and your continued dedication to the military community, we present you with the Civilian Service Medal." Rachel accepted the medal with steady hands. She didn't make a speech. She simply nodded, shook the general's hand, and returned to her seat. But as she was leaving, General Price stopped her. "Bennett," he said, "you know you could have any job you want. Advisor, consultant. You could name your price at any private security firm in the world." Rachel looked at him. There was peace in her eyes that hadn't been there 20 years ago. "I have the job I want, sir," she said. "I feed soldiers. I make sure they start their day with a warm meal and end it with a full stomach. It's not dramatic. It's not classified, but it matters." She paused at the door. Sometimes the most important missions are the ones no one notices. General Price watched her go, then shook his head and smiled. "She's still the bravest person I've ever known," he said to no one in particular. 6 months after the incident, Rachel Bennett still worked in the Fort Braxton mess hall. She still arrived at 4:30. She still wore her stained apron and her hairnet. She still stirred her pots in silence. But everything had changed. Soldiers who once walked past her without a glance now nodded respectfully. Young privates asked for her advice, not about cooking, but about life. Officers made a point to thank her for her service, not the service she gave in the kitchen, but the service that had been invisible for so long. And every year, on the anniversary of that February morning, a group of soldiers would gather in the mess hall before dawn. They would stand at attention as Rachel arrived. They would salute her, every single one of them, in silence. Rachel never asked them to stop. She never asked them to continue. She simply returned their salute, picked up her apron, and began another day of quiet service. Because that was who Rachel Bennett was. A warrior who had chosen peace. A hero who had chosen anonymity. A legend who had chosen to serve scrambled eggs instead of seeking glory. And in the end, that choice made her more remarkable than any medal could express. The moral of this story is simple. True strength doesn't demand recognition. Sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones who serve in silence, asking for nothing, expecting nothing, simply giving everything they have to give. If this story moved you, please subscribe to Those Who Left a Trace. We bring you true tales of courage, sacrifice, and honor. Stories that remind us of the quiet strength carried by those who serve. And tell us in the comments, who is the quiet hero in your life? We would love to hear your stories. Until next time, stay strong, stay humble, and never forget that greatness often wears the most ordinary disguise. Imagine this. A 4-star general walks into a mess hall, passes every officer in the room, and stops in front of a 53-year-old cook wiping her hands on a grease-stained apron. Without a word, he removes his cap, stands at attention, and salutes her. The entire hall goes silent. Forks freeze midair. Conversations die. Every soldier in that room had laughed at her, mocked her, called her the Invisible Woman. Now they watched in disbelief as the most decorated general in the army held a salute for a woman who served scrambled eggs for a living. This is the story of Rachel Bennett, the cook no one respected, until the day her secret shattered everything they thought they knew. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Those Who Left a Trace so you never miss these powerful stories of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? We love seeing how far these stories travel. Rachel Bennett arrived at Fort Braxton every morning at 4:30, long before the sun touched the Texas horizon. Her routine never changed. She parked her old pickup truck in the same spot near the loading dock, walked to the back entrance of mess hall, and tied her apron in silence. No small talk with the other kitchen staff. No jokes shared over the coffee pot. Just work. She was 53 years old, with deep lines etched around her eyes and streaks of silver running through her dark hair. Her hands were rough, calloused from years of labor that had nothing to do with cooking. But no one at Fort Braxton knew that. To them, she was just Rachel, the quiet one, the woman who never smiled, never complained, never said more than 3 words at a time. The mess hall at Fort Braxton fed over 2,000 soldiers a day. It was loud, chaotic, and unforgiving. Metal trays clattered against rails. Voices bounced off concrete walls. The smell of bacon grease and industrial coffee hung permanently in the air. And in the middle of it all stood Rachel, invisible behind the steam rising from her pots. The first time someone mocked her, she had been there less than a week. A young sergeant, barely 22, watched her struggle to lift a heavy stock pot onto the burner. He nudged his friend and grinned. "Look at Grandma over there. Think she knows the difference between a spatula and a rifle?" Laughter erupted from the group. Rachel didn't look up. She adjusted the pot, turned on the flame, and kept working. Her face betrayed nothing. It became a pattern. Every week, a new joke, a new comment, a new group of soldiers who saw her as entertainment. "Hey, Rachel, you ever been outside the wire? Or does the kitchen count as your combat zone? Careful, boys. She might attack us with her ladle. I heard she applied for Special Forces but got rejected because she couldn't finish peeling potatoes in time." Each time, Rachel stayed silent. She never defended herself, never fired back, never gave them the satisfaction of a reaction. She simply endured, day after day, month after month, her eyes fixed on her work as if the words couldn't reach her. But the words did reach her. Late at night, alone in her small apartment off base, she would sit by the window and stare at the stars. Her hands, the same hands that now stirred soup and cracked eggs, had once done things these young soldiers couldn't imagine. Things that lived in classified files and encrypted databases. Things that haunted her dreams. No one at Fort Braxton knew about the medals locked in a box under her bed. No one knew about the missions that never made the news. No one knew that the woman they mocked had once been someone else entirely. Staff Sergeant Kevin Moore was one of the worst. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a voice that carried across the mess hall like a bullhorn. He had served 3 tours in Afghanistan and wore his experience like armor. To him, anyone who hadn't seen combat was beneath notice. And Rachel, with her apron and her silence, was the lowest of the low. One morning, Moore stood in the serving line with his usual group of infantrymen. Rachel ladled oatmeal onto his tray without meeting his eyes. "You know what I don't understand," Moore said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "How does someone spend their whole life doing nothing? I mean, look at her. No deployments, no service, probably never held a weapon in her life. And she gets to work on an army base like she belongs here." His buddies laughed. A few soldiers further down the line shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Rachel's hand paused for just a fraction of a second. Then she continued serving, her face a mass of stone. "What's the matter, Rachel?" Moore pressed, leaning closer. "Cat got your tongue? Or do you just not have anything worth saying?" For a moment, something flickered in Rachel's eyes. A shadow, a memory. Then it was gone, replaced by the same empty calm she always wore. "Enjoy your meal, Sergeant," she said quietly, and moved on to the next soldier. Moore snorted and walked away, shaking his head. "Pathetic," he muttered his friends. Absolutely pathetic. But that night, Rachel sat alone in her apartment and opened the box under her bed for the first time in months. Inside lay a silver star, a bronze star with valor, and a purple heart. Beneath them, a faded photograph of a younger woman in combat gear, standing beside a group of soldiers in an unnamed desert. Her face was leaner then, her eyes sharper, but it was unmistakably her. She traced her finger over the photograph, then closed the box and slid it back into the darkness. The weeks passed, and Rachel's routine continued unchanged. She arrived early, worked hard, and left late. She never ate in the mess hall with the others. She never attended base events or social gatherings. She existed in the margins, a ghost in a grease-stained apron. But the rumors about her had started to shift. Small things at first. A private noticed that Rachel moved differently than the other kitchen staff. Her steps were precise, measured, almost tactical. When she carried heavy loads, her posture never broke. When loud noises erupted in the kitchen, she didn't flinch like the others. She simply turned toward the sound, assessed it, and returned to her work.